So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us for the second annual Walking the Red Road, Ending Gender-Based Violence in Our Community conversation in support of the Moose Hide campaign. My name is Nicole Taylor-Sterritt. My pronouns are she and her, and I have mixed Gitxsan and European heritage. I am also the manager of Indigenous Event Protocol here at SFU, and I will be your host today. I'm so honored and privileged to be speaking to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Silks Okanagan people. And I recognize that in this virtual setting, we will be tuning in from various locations across Turtle Island and acknowledge the traditional keepers of those lands. I also respectfully acknowledge the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Katzie, Kikite, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen peoples on whose traditional unceded territories SFU's 3 campuses reside. The Moose Hide campaign is a grassroots movement of Indigenous and non-Indigenous men and boys who are standing up against violence towards women and children. Last year, Fraser University became an ambassador campus for the campaign, which aims to end gender-based violence by creating safer campuses and communities. Becoming an ambassador campus and today's event builds on the anti-violence work of many at SFU who have over the years raised awareness and addressed gender-based violence. And I apologize in advance for my dog who wants to be in this conversation as well. So why the Red Road? For some of you who may not know, it's a spiritual pathway to wellness and healing that many Indigenous people refer to for those who have experienced trauma or intergenerational trauma to try to turn their life around. I'm very much looking forward to having this conversation with our speakers today and understand that we will likely go into some difficult topics. So please take care of yourselves, however that may be throughout this session. If you need any additional support outside of this event, a Sexual Violence Support and Prevention Office, or SVSPO, case manager will be on call to provide personal support immediately and during the event through Zoom. And we're posting a link in the chat for that space right now. The SVSPO and the Indigenous Student Center have also worked together on a document that provides multiple resources, both internal and external to SFU, should you need additional professional support. This document will be posted in the chat. Before we dive in, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping notes. Please note that this session is being recorded. If you are having technical difficulties or need assistance at any time during this event, please use the chat box located at the bottom of your screen to message tech help. At the end of our discussion, we will have time for a short Q&A from our audience. To ask questions of our speakers or to comment on the presentation, please use the chat box and send a direct message to myself. You will only be able to chat with the panelists and myself individually. We understand that the topics of this conversation can be challenging, so please be mindful with your questions. We also made the decision to set this event up as a Zoom meeting so we could feel connected with the audience. If you feel comfortable, please turn your camera on. This session is best viewed in speaker view. However, if you'd like to see everyone's faces, please choose gallery view in the top right corner of your screen. And lastly, automatic closed captioning is available for this event. To turn it on or off, just click the box marked CC on your toolbar. Please note that the closed captioning technology may spell some words incorrectly, including Indigenous words and names. So to ensure that we start this event in a good way, I am just so blessed and honored to be in the presence of Kevin Kelly and Michael Kelly-Gabriel, who are here to welcome us to this virtual circle. Kevin and Michael are cultural ambassadors for the Kwantlen First Nation. They are father and son who teach culture every day through storytelling, ceremony, relationship building, and singing and drumming. And I'm just so glad to have them join us today from SFU's Surrey campus. So please join me in welcoming Kevin and Michael.
We want to thank both for the call We're always respecting the territories you're on. As I said earlier, if somebody's taught you well. And I know my brother Steve would be very proud of the work that you carry out for him. I have a lot of respect for my brother Steve too. Really, he's like a brother to me. We're doing anything for him at his campus. He knows that, but he's doing anything for us. The other ones that have come, it's really important. I've met a lot of you, seen and met a lot of you, and I thank you for your presence because it shows that the ones that you have in your session today are the ones that are supposed to be here. Sometimes it's a very difficult time, you know. In the 90s, I worked for our people up in Stolo for health. And these are the things that we all talk about in the communities. We have it in our communities and out of our communities. But unless you do something about it, like what you're doing, it always seems just to slide or ride. For those who don't know, some of the faces, I have 8 children. I've got 5 daughters, 3 boys, 2 grandsons. My wife is Stika, hereditary chief of the Kwantlen First Nation. She's been chief 33 years for a community. Took over for her late father who had health issues, Kelly-Gabriel. My youngest daughter one time said to me and my wife when we're sitting in the living room, we do a lot of things for missing women in Surrey. We always respect the ones in the families that lost a loved one. We're still trying to find them. A lot of times when we lose a loved one, it's nice when we can find that person and bring it back home and lay them to rest. This is a lot of closure for our people when this happens. Tears of Fears up in Prince George. My daughter one night said to us, her mom is chief, and she said to her, looked at us and says, how come they only show this once in a while on the news, but then you never hear about it again, and they never do nothing about it? This is a 19-year-old daughter, my baby, my girls. She said to her mom, we see this on the news over and over, but they show it once and then that's the last you ever hear about it. We're missing women. But if it was some other culture or race, they'd actually do something about it. My daughter's smart, she's 19, and this is what she witnessed. And then the thing I just seen on the news last night is that I told my son coming here that those girls that were attacked in Vancouver, the oldest one was 56, but they caught the young man that did it. So mental health issues too with COVID and other stuff too that's still going on. I'm just honored to be here. I'm honored to represent my wife in the community. And unless we don't stand together like what we're doing and make a difference in what's going on, this is why you are here. Different cultures, different races, different faces. We all can make a difference if we wanna. This is what you're gonna do. I let my son speak, and then I'm just, Nicole, I just thank you once again for always respecting us. And I've always told Steve, you know, the ones that he has working for him, they're very respectful. He has good workers that look after, that work for him at SFU, and we hold our hands up to you, and we thank you for respecting the lands that you are on. So I'm gonna let my son carry on, and I hope you have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Swell Siaya. In my language, that means good day, my friends and family. The reason why I say Swell Siaya is because we practice lots of ceremony here at SFU. We have really lots of respect for all the campuses, but especially Surrey through the leadership of Joy, Steve, and Nicole, for honestly taking that good step forward on actually moving forward in reconciliation. Having people like us here, Homo people, Indigenous people, here to share our history and our truths here. And going off of our teachings means the world to us. I always start the day with my teachings from my uncle Eugene Harry, thanking my Chicho CM, that's my creator, thanking my elders in my community, the ones that are here and the ones that are ancestors, for them paving the way for a young man like me, an elder that stands across from me, to be here to share our ways of life. that's been passed down orally. That hasn't been written down. For the children in the back of our minds, the ones that are here that we're sitting here for, the future children, and the ones that are unborn yet, that are going to be sitting here one day. These are the discussions that we need to have so that young Indigenous women and young Indigenous men feel like when they come in here and they see the moose hide, they just see that little a piece of hide. And without words being spoken, you know that you're standing against violence against women. And that's what we continue, that's what I continue to share as I go to these. We've been going to safe homes, we've been going to treatment centers, sharing this with young men and young women about having this value and sharing with these people that your voice is one thing that they can't take away from you. That we have to go back into our old traditional ways of our matriarch systems that we have down here in our ways of life, where we thank our mothers and we thank our grandmothers for giving us the beautiful gift called life. We wouldn't be here. I was sharing this with my dear friend here. I wouldn't be here without the strength of a woman. Carried me for 9 months. We wouldn't be here. We can't carry children. And if you can't carry children, you have the gifts to cherish life as well. Not everyone has a gift of bearing life, but they still have that gift of cherishing life for the ones that are unable to carry life. And we have to honor that because we've been honoring our females for so long, and we lost that because of colonization. A lot of that has been gone. And I keep sharing that more and more. I have to learn to respect my grandmother and my mother because I wouldn't be the man I am today. And amongst everybody here, you had a strong mother, grandmother in your life. And when you wear that moose hide, you think of your mom, you think of your grandma, you think of your daughters, you think of your granddaughters, you think of your grandchildren that are unborn yet. That's what that represents. And this is such an important conversation to have, especially with a university like this, because a lot of people don't know this. They weren't raised like this. And it's good to have conversations like this, even if they feel uncomfortable. But I stand fully behind the Moose High campaign. Violence against women is wrong. And I stand with all the people that support the Moose High campaign because all these women deserve to feel safe and upheld, along with the men that need to be properly taught. That's the one thing that my grandma Helen shared with me as a spiritual healer. She said, you gotta learn to not teach out of anger when you teach. You gotta learn to grab them, and instead of being angry, it could be a teachable opportunity. Make it a good memory, and maybe down the line, that young man will share that with his daughter, might share that with his granddaughter about the respect that you guys have. But we come here out of a good place because we know that there's a bunch of other speakers that have all this knowledge and they want to share their story. So we want to honor them, thanking them for sharing a part of their story on pushing the Moose High campaign when we aren't there, when we're not speaking about violence against, we don't stand up for violence against women. That we want to uphold them to give them strength, have their ancestors here with us. Because when we share our prayers for all 66 people, 62 people that are watching here, I share this like 1,000,000 times and people always ask me why, but that's the teachings of my mother. She shared it with me. You have to keep sharing because it might be one person that might be the first time hearing it, even though you might share it 1,000,000 times with other people. But the drum to us is the closest thing that we can do when we share our songs. This is not a performance for the ones that are here. This is our way of prayer. Because we don't know what you're going through. We want to ground you through what you're going through to make sure that you're here present to listen to these good words that all the speakers here are going to share. So that the ancestors are behind, because when we share our prayers, the drum to us is the beat of our heart. Because we remember when we were in our mom's womb for 9 months, we didn't hear your heartbeat. The drum is the beat of the heart, but also the beat of the heart of our ancestors that were here before us. You're here with us. when we share these prayer songs. After we share these prayer songs, these chairs are no longer empty. This room is no longer empty. Along with your rooms that are inside your homes or your offices. My teacher shared with me, as far as the sound of prayer goes, because you'll hear this, is where the prayer will go into your home, so the ancestors will be. So we're here to start the day off in a good way with a welcome, honoring the traditional territory of the Kwantlen, Kinti, and Semiahmoo people, and thanking SFU for taking that step forward, of educating not only yourself, but also the students that are here about this important topic. I'm going to take this home to my elders, I'm going to take this home to my community, take this home to my partner, share this, and share the pride I have as SFU as they move forward. So the song that we're going to share with you is a prayer song that I really love to share. It's part of healing, my healing, and all healing for all people. I was going through lots of grief, and I had to move away to the island, Vancouver Island, back in 2019, because my heart was broken through loss in my community. And I prayed every single day when I was in the island with my partner in a housing. And I said, I need to take a song back, not only for myself, but for all people to be able to heal. Please let me take a song back. And I prayed every day by the ocean. And I heard this song. I remember the teachings of an elder when I went on my first canoe journey after I graduated high school. She said, young man, I got to share these words with you so that you can share with all people that are going through a tough time. She said, whenever you're feeling unbalanced, mentally, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, you go down to any river, any lake, any ocean, or any sort of body of water, and you go speak what's inside your mind, you go speak what's inside your heart, you go speak what's inside your emotions and your spirit, and that water spirit will take you there. Go dip your hand, go dip your foot, and that water spirit will take it away, because there's no same flow of water to waste. So when this song came to me, it's meant to brush off any of the past history that you have, any of the grief that you carry today. It's a cleansing song. And I want to start today with a song called Ocean Views, to honor each and every one of you. Because I know sometimes when we talk about certain subjects, it might get heavy. I'm sharing with you now, if it tends to get heavy, don't carry any of that, but just get educated from what is going to be said today. And I thank the speakers for coming here, because I know a piece of yourself gets taken away each time you speak. So I want to honor you, and thanking SFU for honoring one of the 3 land-based nations, having us here to start the day off in a good way, so that you guys can continue on your beautiful meeting today. So I'm going to start the day off with a song, and I'm going to honor each and every one of you. And in your own way, if you need to pray, that's what my grandma shared with me. Pray in your own way, because we don't know if you need it today to give you strength. So continue on doing your good work. Thank you, SFU, for having this meeting. Thank the organizers, Nicole, and I think her name was Jenny. Jenny was Jenny. Thank you very much for being on the sidelines here and making everything run smoothly. We have to honor all those people. This wouldn't be here today. So I just
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin and Michael, for that beautiful opening. I always feel blessed to be in space with you, and I know I feel drawn to be in space with you physically right now. So thank you for sharing that, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully soon, one day. All right, so I'm gonna move on and we're gonna dive into meeting our speakers for today's session. It is my pleasure to now introduce the first speaker, Sage Lacerte from the Carrier Nation, who is the National Youth Ambassador of the Moosehead Campaign. In 2018, Sage founded the SAGE Initiative, an impact investment collective for Indigenous women between the ages of 18 and 24 who are interested in social impact economics. And I'm certain she'll tell us more about that in the coming minutes. I'm also very excited to welcome Jake Stika, the Executive Director of Next Gen Men. Jake is a passionate speaker and facilitator focused on many gender-based issues, including seeing a future where men and boys experience less pain and cause less harm. Jake has spoken at the United Nations as a part of the Canadian delegation and participated in the UN Women's Safe Cities Initiative Global Forum. Welcome, Sage and Jake. I think that we'll probably dive right in. So Sage, let's begin with you. I invite you to take a couple minutes to introduce yourself on a more personal level. Tell us why you do what you do and why addressing gender-based violence is important to you.
Masi Cho, thank you for the introduction. Masi Cho to Kevin and Michael for opening in a good way and for having a little conversation with me when we started. It's so much of our way to say, who are you, where are you from, and just open that circle in a really warm way. So thank you. To Nicole for inviting me, to Joy Johnson. I see many of our friends, our Associate Vice President, and many others who have been in conversations with us at the campaign while you have become an ambassador campus. And I'm so proud of you and so happy to see that this is the movement that you're pushing forward and something that you want to see on your campus. I think something that really resonated with me is thinking about our moms and our grandmas and our mums. And I just want to offer an opportunity as we're starting this conversation, and it's something that we do at the Moose Hide campaign a lot, that my dad, Paul Lacerte, taught me, is to just spend a moment and call your matriarchs into the space and call, maybe even just vision your mom's face and call her in and sit with her throughout this conversation, and as a reminder to us about why we're here and how we got here. So I appreciate that introduction. As I said, my name is Sage Lacerte, Sage Lacerte Sadni, Tebes Nachalya, Kwantlen Keoch, Sai Grana Lashabu Injan Yinkaktene Keoch. I was born and raised on the territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, Songhees and Esquimalt nations, now what is known as Victoria, and have spent my time internationally between Victoria and back home on the Carrier territory. And I'm so blessed and honored to have been raised with my culture and by my community, by my dad and my sisters and all of our extended family up north. And while I have a minute to introduce the campaign and an aspect of why we're here today, I just want to call them into the room and give a special mention to my sister. Many of you may know her as the co-founder of the Moose Hide campaign, Raven Lacerte, and she is 38 weeks pregnant this week, and she'll be welcoming in another member of our family, of the Moose Hide family. And I'm so honored to have another little one that we get to be in relationship with. And it's such a good practice for me as an auntie to show up for this little one, as well as her 3-year-old daughter, Cedar Sus, in our language, Cedar Bear. And to just call them into the room. And when I look at Cedar, I see her cheeks that looked like mine when I was little, and even now to this day. And I see that she has this joy in her eyes. And sometimes when we have our sharing circles, she shares, we all share something that we're grateful for. And sometimes she answers, I'm grateful for happy. I'm grateful to be happy. And that's something that I've learned so much from her, is to really sit in the joy. And I see that in her eyes when we get to sit in circle together. And I love that about her. I love to see my little brown baby. She says, I'm brown all the time, and you're brown too. And she's so proud. And it's something that we've learned a lot about in our family. Having grown up on the Carrier territory, which is in central BC, north of Prince George and south of Prince Rupert, and that kind of region is where you'll find carriers. We come from the Lake Babine Nation and Notlay-Wet'en, between Fraser Lake and Burns Lake in BC, and I've learned a lot of history about that region since growing up there. I've learned a lot about how Highway 16 has become known as the Highway of Tears as a result of hundreds and thousands of girls and women having gone missing and been murdered and found along this highway. And as a way of showing my respect to Michael and Kevin, and thank you for those vulnerabilities that you shared today. I think it's important to practice intimacy and to share some of these truths. Some of our family members, two of my first cousins, have gone missing along that highway. And that was it was a very catalytic moment in our family where we decided something needed to be done and a cultural shift needed to happen in order to ensure that our women and our girls were safe in this country, not just along that region or the Highway of Tears, but everywhere in Canada. And my sister was only 16 when she shared such good medicine with us, which was she was hunting and she harvested a moose with my dad. And she said, I'm so tired of having to hear these narratives about our women and our girls being unsafe. I'm so tired of having to have all these extra protocols and procedures to make sure we're safe. We are so precious in our societies and in our culture and in our communities. And women and girls practice so much leadership in our communities traditionally. And she wanted to find a way to raise awareness, but also to enact more action on the part of men and boys who are most often the perpetrators of violence towards our women and girls. And it felt really important for my dad and my sister to be involved in co-creating this, because he has 5 daughters and he loves us so, so much. He holds us so dear to his heart. And he always said that he wanted to do everything that he possibly can to make sure that we live our lives free of violence, and not just free of violence, but also from a place of love and respect and with the joy and freedom to live our lives as we please. And so they were able to envision that a Canada where there was no violence towards women and children. And the way they wanted to do that was by offering folks a mechanism, a way that they could start talking about it, and an accountability structure to say, if I'm going to put this on, then I know that I'm going to live a life free of violence, and make sure that others know about it by raising awareness, talking around our dinner tables, bringing it to our colleagues at work, or when you go play hockey or sports, you're willing to talk to those people in those kind of private conversations when you might see some of that harm bubbling up, some of those harmful narratives. And I'm so proud to share that through some impact measurement, we learned that each of our pins generates 5 conversations at least. And so we've been able to distribute nearly 3 million pins across Canada to 4,000 communities. And ambassador campuses like yours are helping generate those conversations and gift the pins to more people so that we can have that wider reach. I feel like I just want to share that when people ask me about my pin, and when I'm at Starbucks or the grocery store or out and someone says, hey, what's that on your jacket? Is it a fashion statement? And I say, thank you for asking, just opening up that conversation in a really gentle way, and being mindful that there's a lot of self-care that should be practiced when sharing, and just saying, I wear it to symbolize my commitment to live a life free of violence, and I support the Moose Hide campaign in their vision of ending violence towards all women and children. And just speaking it out loud, speaking our goals out loud or writing them down has been proven to make them more actionable and to have them realized. And I truly believe that our theory of change is making major change, especially in post-secondary institutions. And I'm so grateful for the willingness to have this conversation today, and just to see my cousin, my relative Jake here, who is also operating in the space, gives me a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement that there are other men's organizations and circles doing the same work. So I'm glad to be in conversation with you today. And hopefully we can share share some of our lived experiences and stories that will help some of you feel like you're ready to mobilize and to stand up with us and to make that change. So thank you for letting me open and introduce myself, and I'm excited for our conversation today. Merci.
Thank you, Sage. That's fantastic. That was the most beautiful opening and introduction. So thank you for that. So I'll now pass it over to Jake, and I'll ask the same question. So why do you do what you do, and why does addressing gender-based violence, or why is it important to you?
I mean, Sage did such a good job, so it's really difficult to follow. But I want to acknowledge and say thank you to Kevin and Michael for the opening and for the beautiful song and bringing in the idea of grief into this conversation as well too, and then Sage for talking about the need for vulnerability and intimacy in these conversations as well too. And I'm going to try to make a bridge here, so bear with me, but I'm dealing with a lot of grief right now. I think the world remains a strange and scary place, especially with the onset of war. I myself came to Canada as a refugee immigrant from Czechoslovakia, running away from communism. And though I'm not Ukrainian, a lot of the thoughts of what those people are experiencing sit with me, and it's brought up a lot of complicated emotions and histories. And we were so graciously welcomed to Canada as settlers, and myself, I continue my learning and unlearning on this journey of truth and reconciliation. And despite the privilege of coming to Canada as a settler and just very visibly being a straight white male, like all those check boxes of privilege, I found myself at 19 and 22 really struggling with my own mental health, predominantly depression. And, at 19, my coping mechanism was binge drinking and fistfights. And at 22, my coping mechanism was self-harm. And in that process, I ended up in, counseling and going on my own healing journey as, we talk about this red road. And, I came to understand that it was this masculine script of, you got to be tough, you can't show emotion, you can't ask for help, that was really guiding a lot of how I was showing up in the world. And, I was dealing and causing that harm to myself. But as Sage pointed out as well, when we talk about violence against women, we really need to talk about men's violence against women. The violence doesn't just happen by itself, right? There's a perpetrator there. And so when we think about Next Gen Men's vision for a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm, we're really talking about the harms that boys and men are experiencing in this patriarchal society, and that often, if we don't take it out on ourselves, which is evidenced in male suicide rates or overdose or male on male violence, trickles into our communities where we harm women and children and non-binary and transgender and people of other genders, right? And so I'll share one quote from the feminist author Bell Hooks that really, I think, guides a lot of the work. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but it's from the book Will to Change, if anyone's interested in reading. She says, the first act of violence that patriarchy asks of men is not that against women, but that against themselves. And should they fail to psychologically and emotionally cripple themselves, they'll be met by a group of men that will do it for them. And so Next Gen Men is really working as an organization to transform the way the world sees, thinks, and acts about masculinity, especially in those male dominant places. So among groups of boys in school, in locker rooms, in community, in pubs, in male dominant workplaces like construction and resource extraction and all those kinds of places. So that really, I think, is a catalyst for me, not necessarily coming into this conversation with the specific goal of, ending gender-based violence against women, which is an important goal, but really, how do we as men and boys show up in the world? And are we showing up in ways that are healthy for ourselves and our communities?
Wow, well, that was a fantastic answer, Jake. Thank you. You are so very well spoken. So I really, really appreciate all of your contributions there. So Sage and Jake, if you feel ready, we might dive into conversation here. And I'll start with my first question, which Jake sort of already touched on. So I wonder if we can just kind of bridge onto that. So speaking to the red road, and I spoke to the meaning behind it and the path to wellness and healing. Can you give your perspective on this concept and tell us why this might be significant in ending gender-based violence? So I'll pass it to Sage, and then maybe we can kind of start a conversation about it.
I've been reflecting since we had our initial conversations about the concept of walking the red road and integrating some of our spiritual healing as individuals, but also in our communities as a collective people. And it's something that we try to center in our work at the campaign as much as we can, because we recognize how much healing must be done, not only in our Indigenous communities, but for folks in all people groups of Canada. We see that around the world today. And I just kind of, without, I want to lightly just reference what's going on today in the Ukraine, and to just offer a moment of respect and of mutual respect for the people who experience acts of harm and hate, and just to recognize that the work that we're doing is really being done with the intention of walking along that path, and to promote that in others, to say, will you look inward and take on this personal responsibility and accountability to walk that road yourself? Because these movements will only go so far as one individual can allow them to, and as one people group can allow them to. And it feels so important to refer back to when folks are experiencing harm or perpetuate harm, it comes from a place of, it can come from their individual experience, but it does come from intergenerational trauma. We have had multiple generations of folks who have been displaced and who have experienced diaspora and who feel a sense of lovelessness. And I'm glad that Jake called on Bell Hooks. I just read All About Love by Bell Hooks again, and she talks about how one of the biggest ailments in our society is a sense of loneliness or lovelessness. The lack of will to show love to your brother or sister or family member or community member. And it reminded me how important it is to reflect on that road and that path as often as you can. Just return to it, have a check-in with yourself and with the people you're most close to, and say, what is that path for us? And are we close to it? Do we feel like we're straying away in certain areas, whether that be physically or spiritually? I know recently mentally, it's just been, there's so many problems with our mental health as a result of social isolation, and that's totally valid. Us as human beings, we're not meant to be isolated from each other. And to just have those check-ins as often as possible has been the way that our team has encouraged folks to move forward in our own personal commitment and accountability structures. And I'm appreciative of the use of the term itself, because sometimes you don't really have a word to refer back to it. So having walking the red road or the red path gave us a way to reflect on that concept as a team. So that's just something that we've been reflecting on, and I'd be interested to hear, Jake, about your perception or your perspective on that concept, and how it has come forward in Next Gen Men for you.
Thanks for that. Admittedly, the red road and the red path are new concepts, new frameworks for me. But I think it really comes down to healing. And I often think about there being, 3 levels of change as well too. I often refer to it as individual, interpersonal, and systemic, right? And oftentimes it really does begin from that individual place of healing yourself, your conception of self, and having that good relationship with yourself. But that also doesn't happen in isolation. It always comes in relationship, right? As much as we want to say, I booked a retreat and that, week away gave me this and that, but what were you reading? You were reading someone else's lived experiences. What were you listening to while you were on there? Someone else sharing, you know, so we're always in relationship. And that's why the interpersonal part is so important. When we're on that journey, it's important to share that journey with others as well too. And I find that a lot of men just aren't socialized to talk about those kinds of things as well too. And that's why I'm such a big fan of the Moose Hide campaign, or, you know, White Ribbon, or those kinds of movements that really put forward those conversations, because, you know, walking that visual of walking a road alone or walking a road together is so different as well too. And how maybe lonely and isolating one version of that is, but how almost an epic journey walking it together could be. So and if we want to change that system, we have to go together. We can't do it alone.
I really appreciate both of your answers. Sage, do you have anything to add on to that, or do you think we should pass off onto a new question? I think
I just
really-
have one, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I just had one piece that feels like such a central component of a lot of what we're talking about, which is that willingness to be vulnerable and that willingness to not walk alone, and to welcome others into that circle. And I recognize that that is a massive barrier, and that it can feel like a huge hurdle, just extending the hand or opening that conversation. And that's really what we're kind of honing in on in this conversation, is opening that. And it's one of the places that we've worked on most. At our gatherings, we always have talking circles where folks can kind of build their own circle however they see fit, regardless of their age or gender. We come together and we share from our heart. And kind of like today, we build a container where there's safety, where you can go speak to someone if you'd like to, if something has felt sore that day or something has really kind of been triggered within you. And I think the opportunity to talk in circle, especially when you see men form circles with other men, and you see that vulnerability really come out, and whether they've been someone who has created harm or who has experienced harm, which we all have. I think it's important to refer back to those circles and know that they're always there. Whether they're with your family or your friends or at our gatherings, you know that every year you can come to us and you can talk about this issue, and we'll always be there, and we'll always create that container. And that's our commitment to you. So I'm appreciative for that conversation starter piece, which is one of the hardest pieces to start, but it's one of the best ways to heal, I've found.
Absolutely. You know, I recognize throughout the pandemic, a lot of men kind of in and around my circle have, I think, come to a place of realizing they need to be vulnerable. And that's the biggest hurdle, is not knowing even where to start. So I think that both of your organizations and the movements that you're working towards are so, so important for creating a world with more love and empathy and community. So I appreciate that so much. So I'm going to ask another question, and all of these questions are somewhat intertwined. So and sort of vague in a way, so that we can bridge conversation. But my next question is, what do you think are the root causes of gender-based violence in our society? Why does this problem persist from generation to generation? And whoever wants to dive in, yeah.
Yeah, if I can jump in, like that bell hooks quote that I paraphrased earlier, I really think is for me just a foundational concept of the idea. And within that, you know, she names patriarchy. And if we think about patriarchy, like obviously there's the colonial aspect of it as well too. But if we break out the word, you know, pater and archaim, Para is father, Archain is power, right? Father power. So it's what we inherit through those generations. And by definition, it was handed down to us by our forefathers. And, we've seen a lot of generational change, especially around how we value women in society. It's just over 100 years roughly that women could vote in Canada, right? Like, and not to mention then, going further and racialized women or Indigenous women not getting that right till the 1960s. But that father power and the power of kind of breaking that chain. And I think about, my own background. On the one hand, my matrilineal grandfather was very much a patriarch, very domineering, kind of what he said goes, didn't talk about emotion, those kinds of things. But on the other hand, my father's father was not that, because my grandmother on that side was fluent in 7 languages. And in communist Czechoslovakia, you don't really get to travel. But because of her unique skill set, she was a technical secretary sent on diplomatic missions to like Kenya and Uruguay and all these, far-flung places, which left my paternal grandfather home taking care of 2 sons. And my dad was 6 years older than his brother. And so he stepped into kind of a bit of a caregiving role as well, too. And, then I think about who I am and how I show up in the world, and the role model of my father being very engaged and caring, still, a primary breadwinner in this structure and those kinds of things, but really shifting his life around, supporting my passion, my dreams, taking us to Canada, those kinds of things, and the power that father figure has to influence that. And, unfortunately, I think that my father was able to shed some of those, patriarchal domineering power structures, but not necessarily the stoic, don't talk about emotion type things. So I inherited some of that still and have had my own healing journey. But all that story to say, no little boy is born thinking they want to dominate and hurt others. It is a society and a culture that steeps us in competition and domination, predominantly against other boys and men. And so, when Sage talks about how powerful it is for men to be vulnerable in circle and share and those kinds of things, in the gender space, they often call it the father wound or the male wound, right? And from a young age, we often see fathers physically distance themselves from their sons. There's a really period of time where they're babies or toddlers and they're intimate and they're snuggling, but at some point they physically distance themselves. And it's hard for that child to understand why that is, when the women in their family, their mothers, their aunts, their grandmothers, stays close and intimate with them. And boys don't have the permission to be physically emotional and intimate with each other beyond, 3 or 4, unless it's roughhousing, right? But we need that intimacy. So that's kind of the birth of like, boys will be boys, right? And then we're socializing them not necessarily to thrive in these institutions where, they have to sit still to get an education and behave. And on the same time, we've come to understand that education for women and girls is a way to a better life. And so we've socialized young women and girls to thrive in those settings where they have to sit still and whatnot. So you've got the boys who act out one way and the girls who are socialized to behave. And then no wonder the boys are overdiagnosed with behavioral issues or ADHD or those types of things, right? And they might feel broken and upset because of those types of things. And they might get emotional and they might start crying about it. And then we tell them boys don't cry, right? And then, a couple of years into that, we say, you know what? We're going to introduce them to the world of sports, right? And like, I was a former semi-pro basketball player. I love competition, but those coaches are often some of the first male authority figures or, mentors that they have outside of their home, their father or other familial figures. And if those men leading those sports teams haven't done their own work to understand, the difference between competition and domination, and they start, putting in structure around, we need to crush them, we need to whatever, right? Like, and maybe you're 8 years old and you stub your toe playing soccer and you're on the field and your coach tells you to man up, By the time you're 8, you've learned boys will be boys, boys don't cry, and man up, right? And then we just compound and compound over young boys' lives those messages, right? And, maybe it gets to a point where they're, in relationship with a young woman and, considering intimacy or taking the further relationship, and they may be uncomfortable or maybe nervous and they're trying to communicate it. They don't have a lot of practice about it. But when that young woman says, I'm not interested or not right now, or it's, whatever, they push back, nobody's ever listened to those boys' emotions their entire life. So they don't have the emotional capacity to listen to someone else because everything that they've been taught is to push through, right? And so that's why we see the vast majority of women's first intimate experiences being unwanted, right? And not necessarily the full extent of, let's say, assault or something like that, but just not how they imagined it or how they had wanted it, right? And that's a culture that many people's first intimate relationships are those types of things. And so that whole story is incredibly sensationalized, and not every single experience relates to everyone. But I hope that in sharing that story, you see yourself or someone you know or something else in that story that it's true.
That was really impactful, Jake. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking about even how sometimes women are also told to just not speak up. It's this kind of dichotomy of men being told to do one thing and women to be small and to not speak up. So it is definitely a cultural problem, right? Or a societal problem. And we need so much work. We need so many more people like you both who are doing this really important work. So thank you. Sage, do you have anything to add on that, on generational violence?
Yeah, thank you, Jake. I love being in circle with you. I feel like I learn a lot every time we come together, and just as, I guess, maybe for some context, I am not a semi-pro basketball player, but I did take a gender studies program at the University of Victoria, and have come to the campaign. And what a lot of people have liked to say, especially in the past few years, through the emergence of gender studies after having kind of maybe transitioned from women's studies, is they like to look to gender experts. And I want to preface all of this by saying that I'm coming from my lived experience and from the voice of the campaign and from what I know, but I'm not an expert. But I think it does feel important to return to that question and to think about why this continues to happen. And it's so cyclical. Like Jake said, it's learned behavior. And without diving too deep into this form of exercise, I think it's important to even just reflect on maybe some of the things that you've heard from your friends or in your own family, when people reflect and they say, oh, well, when I was a kid, we would have this form of punishment, or we would see this as if we misbehave at school, this is the way that we would be punished. And so people kind of share what their parents did. And then often they try to maybe shake a little bit of that off. They brush something from their parents off and they keep a little bit, and then you kind of brush a little bit off, but you keep a little bit. And intergenerationally, the idea is that we're shaking more and more of that pain and trauma and some of that harm off. And some of those learned experiences that we cannot fault ourselves or our previous generations for. And that's something that I really want to call on. And I appreciate Nicole, you kind of alluding to and giving me permission to mention SAGE Initiative, which is my own project that I work on to train Indigenous women in financial literacy. And I believe that there's a really, really intimate connection between harm reduction and improving financial literacy for women in our country to ensure that we have financial independence, the freedom, the mobility to do what we choose, and to be able to, in certain scenarios, to choose if we'd like to find a different apartment or to be more independent in our lifestyle. And it's something that I designed specifically to disrupt and displace that paradigm that centers mostly white men in our society that we were just talking about. And it really seeps into our capitalist or our economy, into our capitalist value system that we have. And it comes from, in our communities, it comes from the colonization process, specifically rooted in instruments like residential schools, or something that's still going on today, the Indian Act, which was meant to remove us and displace us from our current systems, which often had Indigenous women in roles of leadership in our economies, in our communities, in our households, to benefit that population, to benefit the white men or the settler men. And it makes me feel really empowered when we have conversations like this, because the conversations that we are having right now are designed to reverse that process that they were trying to do, and to re-establish the critically important leadership roles that women have in our communities, not just in our economy or in a household, but I think really just larger, just thinking about the way that we view each other as people and our value and worth that we have. And if you go to a hospital or a birth center and you see a room full of newborn babies, could you point out the baby that is worthy or the babies who are not worthy? You can't. Everyone is born worthy. Just like Jake said, everyone is born with a sense of kindness in them, and not for the sake of domination or holding control over another, but really we're just kind of, when we're babies, we really just want like cuddles and mama milk and to feel secure. And I don't think that ever really goes away. Maybe the mama milk kind of falls off after a few years, but we really do just kind of want to find that sense of security, and to feel nurtured and nourished. And I think that that's something that, like, the matrilineal aspect of my culture has taught me a lot about, is to respect our matriarchs and that process of birth work and being able to nourish our communities. And that's that leadership role that I really want to return to. And that's what I think we're doing a really good job of doing today. And like, just constantly trying to give myself a pat on the back and be like, we're doing it, we're making change, and it's going to be gradual and it's going to take a long time. But today we're shaking off a little bit of those old practices and taking on new ones. And we can be really proud of that, I think.
I love that. You made me think of what you said earlier, Sage, about your little niece, who just, she's grateful for being happy. We should be returning to this place of childhood, and I mean, it's easier said than done to take away all of the teachings that our society has brought us up with. But at the end of the day, we need to revert back to that, special little kindness and so much awe and wonder in the world. And yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to move on to the next question, which, Sage, you kind of touched on in a way when you spoke to your experience in university as in gender studies. But how do you think, and also speaking to Simon Fraser University as this education post-secondary institution. So how can our education systems, K-12 and post-secondary, embed education that instills respect and to help prevent gender-based violence? Or one stance, or
I can touch quickly. I think there's a really unique space that I feel really passionate about. And I know that the campaign has kind of worked in different sectors. So sometimes we work with folks who are public servants in governments. Sometimes we work with folks who are in faith-based groups or First Nations communities. My area that I have worked in the past 3 years has been post-secondary and K-12 education. And it's because again, Cedar, my little Cedar bear, my niece, she's 3. I just look at her and I see her like super like plastic brain. And I'm like, you're just learning about the world right now. Like you're just taking in all this information as it comes. She touches things, she puts it in her mouth. She like just wants to figure stuff out. And I have so much hope and belief in our education systems for being able to introduce things as young as 5 years old when folks enter these systems, where they can learn about the essence of what we've been talking about today, which is kindness, what respect is, or even from a cultural perspective, you could say good medicine. Like, what does good medicine feel like, or what does it look like interpersonally or in your communities? And just being able to introduce those concepts from a very young age. I remember being in school, they have a planning course where you learn about your professional development and what you're going to do in the world. And a lot of us at our school tried to advocate for a planning class that was about emotions. Like, we were like, what about how we feel about all of this? And we advocated for it my entire time while I was in my high schooling. And when I came to the campaign, they had created all of these lesson plans and various curriculum for, at the time, it was the province of British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario. And this had been picked up by each of those provinces and was being carried out in K-12 education. And I felt so proud to be a part of that, because that like little sage, like that little youthful sage in me that was like, hey, I need guidance. Now I feel like I'm going through all of these coming of age and I don't know what to do and I feel overwhelmed. That curriculum plan and those lesson plans that are like ready to go for a teacher to just put on their desk and to be able to roll out at any given time gave me hope that the students would have those needs satisfied and those needs met during their time in school, and then roll over maybe to an institution like SFU, who is an ambassador campus and who is making the effort to distribute the pins and cards as much as they can and to generate these conversations, and to know that, again, it just takes time and to be patient with those things, but know that that system change is coming. And this is how we're doing it. And it makes me feel really proud, because I might not have learned about kindness when I was in kindergarten. It might not have been a priority, but to see that it is now gives me a lot of hope to know that we are making those shifts, and to know that we're still that little kid self. Even when we go to a post-secondary institution, we still need that love, that nourishment, that kindness. And to just kind of like make an honorable mention again to SFU for being willing to become an ambassador campus and to be featured as a partner with the Moose Hide campaign is really meaningful. And you are one of the folks who are leading the way and making meaningful change in the landscape across Canadian post-secondary institutions. So yeah, I'm really proud of that. And yeah, just wanted to end by saying thank you for becoming an ambassador campus. It's really, really meaningful.
And it's meaningful to us as well. I mean, we're trying to create a safe and better and more loving community. And I think that this is a really good movement to stand behind and to work towards. So thank you, Sage, and thanks to the Moosehead campaign. Jake, do you have any comments or additions to this question on education?
I'll try to be brief because I know we want to get to some audience questions as well too. But forgive me, I can get a bit ranty sometimes.
Okay.
But you know, I can't speak to the education system, but I can maybe speak a little bit to kind of our theory of change about it, and also the need of doing this work in multiple settings and places. Because I also think about, you know, I'm in my mid-30s. A lot of my guy friends and girlfriends are, you know, having babies and starting families and those kinds of things. And I'm really proud to say that a lot of my male peers are taking parental leave. But they also have no idea what the hell they're doing, right? They don't have role models. It's the first time for them. And I think my generation of men are probably one of the first generations kind of en masse. And there's been people before us who've tried to shed some of these things, but we're trying and we're screwing up because we don't know what we're doing and we're learning. And so, you know, we ask for patience in that. But I think the family is a really important unit to work with, because a lot of the original ideas around gendered socialization begins there. And so when we have empowered men who are taking parental leave, who are building empathy and connection to their children from a very young age, and not just like, you know, like really intuition, I think the word is, right? Because before, when men didn't take leave, they'd come home to an exhausted partner who would hand them a baby and say, do this, this, and this, right? And becomes kind of a task list versus knowing what that child needs. And so, you know, creating that space where there's that deeper connection, that is kind of the beginning before school even starts. And then, you know, I talked about this a little bit in my earlier rant. You know, early childhood education is dominated by women, right? We don't have a lot of men in those spaces. And so it's really important that the people in those spaces are able to serve youth of all genders, boys, girls, youth who are not ascribing to a gender or transitioning or experimenting or those kinds of things. We have to build capacity within that system. Next Gen Men tries not to work in elementary schools just because the youth are really absorbing messages from their environment rather than dialoguing about the concept. But our key area is middle school. So usually 12 to 14, grade 7 to 9 boys, where we try to do our work. And it's because at that age, we see rises in rates of homophobia, misogyny, racism, other kinds of marginalizing attitudes. And our theory around that is because in society still, there's so many messages about the type of great and powerful and strong men that they want to grow up to be. However, you ask a 12-year-old boy and they're like, I don't have any power. My mom tells me what to do. My teacher tells me what to do. My coach tells me what to do. And so the way they start enacting that power is through differentiation in their friend group. And race, sex, and gender are kind of low-hanging fruit of differentiation. And so really that's an opportunity for us to intervene and to role model new ways of being a man that don't rely on those power structures of differentiation. That's really where we try to work. We do some work in kind of high school spaces as well. Some of it's kind of restorative justice and whatnot, but unfortunately kind of at high school, these young people are individual, and, you know, not to write them off, there's some really passionate champions in there, but a lot of the ones that we really want to work with are a bit too cool for school, right? And they have so many extracurricular activities and stuff like that. So we really try to work in that primary prevention space where boys are losing that innocence of what it is to be a boy and a child and starting to act like what they think it is to be a man, and kind of intervening that. And like, just to share like one quick way that we try to do that. Obviously things look a lot different with COVID and virtual programming and those kinds of things. But when we ran after school programs, there was snacks involved, obviously. because you need, a carrot to get the boys out. But before you could receive a snack, you would have to pay another boy a compliment. And if we think about the culture that we have and men complimenting each other, it's non-existent. A woman sees another woman at a dinner, oh my God, I love your hair. Like, who did you see about, right? Like, but you'll never hear guys talking about that, right? And so at this young age, we're encouraging them to pay a compliment to their peer. And at the beginning of the program, it's often like, I like your shoes, man, right? And they get their, chips or whatever. But by the end of it and kind of the work that we're doing together, they're able to articulate, I really appreciated how you stood up for me in that class earlier today, right? And start to like label some of those emotions and the reason why they value each other in their relationships. And so, when I think about K-12 and kind of transforming the education system, it has to start at home. And so we got to do a lot of culture work outside of the education system. Then we need to support early childhood educators to understand the, social and emotional development of youth regarding gender. Then we need to have direct conversations with those youth. And one thing that I see as a big risk right now is we're almost moving towards a gender blind approach. Like, people are complaining, oh, girls have too many supports and those kinds of things because, there was a gap and we needed to support and encourage and empower women and girls. But the boys were left with sports, really was kind of the only extra program they had. And a lot of schools are saying, well, now we're just going to do it regardless of gender. But we know that, being colorblind is not a good anti-racist framework, and being gender blind isn't either. So we need specific supports for male identified youth, female identified youth, and youth who are non-binary, transgender, or, non-gendered. So that's my rant on education.
I appreciate both of your answers. And honestly, like, I'm so grateful to be in conversation with both of you, even though I feel like I'm trying to take a step back a little bit, but I wish we could be here all day. I feel like I'm learning so much. And unfortunately, and I feel sad to say that we can't go into the question and answer period because we are running out of time, but I feel like these nuggets of comments are so special. And I am going to save the chat and the questions that have come in. And I'm going to share them with you after the fact. And maybe if you feel like answering them, we could share them around in a post-event email. So just food for thought. And maybe we'll have to come back again to have this conversation part 2. So I just want to thank you again, because we're running out of time and I'm sad to close this off, but thank you for sharing your wisdom and your hearts with us today. It's been really special. And I think that, from the comments that I'm getting in the chat, this has been a really meaningful conversation. And I'm just reflecting on recent virtual events that I've been to. I think that this is one of the best ones, and I get to have a front seat. So thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing all of your pieces today. So I'm going to bring in our president, Joy Johnson, for a few remarks. So I'm going to introduce her very briefly. She is the 10th president and vice chancellor of SFU, and she's committed to enhancing student learning experiences, working towards reconciliation, and advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion across the university. So I will pass it over to Joy, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole, and hello, everyone. And first of all, Nicole, such a fantastic job of facilitating this conversation. As Nicole said, my name's Joy Johnson, and I'm a white settler. My parents, Don and Lois, were great-grandchildren of settlers who came to Canada wanting to seek a better life. They came into Alberta and to the Red River Valley settlement and occupied land and flourished. And I think it's really important to recognize just how privileged I am because of the opportunities they were given. And I do want to also acknowledge the land I'm on today. I'm speaking to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This has just been an amazing time, and I really want to begin by thanking Kevin Kelly and Michael Kelly-Gabriel of the Kwantlen First Nation. You're such great ambassadors and friends to SFU. I want to thank you for welcoming us into this meaningful and really difficult in many ways conversation. You started us off in a good way. Your words, your drumming and prayers really grounded us. So I just want to lift my hands up to you and thank you ever so much for everything you do for Simon Fraser University. I also, in closing, I feel I do in some ways want to be a witness to what's happened today. And I do appreciate that as a witness, it's important to talk about what's moved me, but also talk about what commitments I can make to take this, the learnings of today forward. And I've been thinking a lot about that as I've been listening to Sage and Jake. I really want to thank both of you for your leadership and for sharing your personal perspectives and experiences. I really like the idea, and I think it's a fantastic notion of this being good medicine for all of us. Sage, you began by talking about sitting in the joy, and no pun intended, I do take my name seriously, but there's something really important about today, both thinking about the opportunities for us to change, but also how painful some of these experiences have been. And I really think this notion of sharing truths, painful truths, is important. I really heard you when you talked about these catalytic moments and how important they are to really start to shift the conversation. These little pins, I'm wearing one today, that are, I really have come to appreciate, I think in a new way, how important they are. This notion that every pin potentially can generate 5 conversations and really calls upon all of us to stand up and be part of the change is really, I think, so important. Jake, I want to thank you for sharing your story as a settler and your healing journey. We talked about the importance of being vulnerable ourselves, and I think you really did display in so many ways just an authenticity, a willingness to really demonstrate a different way of being a man in this world. And I do deeply appreciate that. And I love your notion of a future where boys and men feel less pain and really centering the importance of men looking inward. In both of your conversations, I heard the word love, and I was at a meeting earlier today with the university's presidents, and it was really interesting how, again, in that conversation, the notion of love came up, and it doesn't often with the university's presidents. So I think it is important to be thinking about the role of love in our lives and in our communities. This is SFU's second year as an ambassador campus for the Moose Hide campaign. And I want to say we're so grateful for this partnership and for the opportunity to come together to discuss the realities and ongoing impacts of gender-based violence in our communities. And the path, the red road, the path to wellness and healing. I really want to say to the entire SFU community who are involved in this initiative, thank you for doing the work. You're working hard to bring all of us together today. I want to thank you for that, but also for the continuing work around the campaign. As I've been listening today, I've also been thinking about how we can take the knowledge shared here and use it to inform SFU's work on addressing and preventing gender-based violence on our campuses. And this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I have family members and friends who've been personally affected by gender-based violence. And I think it's time for all of us to step up and to think about what our roles are. I think what I've heard is it's important to pay attention to the personal, the interpersonal, but also the institutional, our structures. And I think even calling people into discussions about gender-based violence is important. And I think the university has a role to play there. But one thing that really resonates for me is this notion that violence is learned. And so it can be unlearned. We can change, and education has a role to play. We can start to think, imagine new futures and think about taking on new practices. So I'm hopeful. Today's conversation really has reinforced my belief that SFU's commitments to decolonization and reconciliation can only really meaningfully transpire by learning from and through these kinds of partnerships. And I really want to thank all of you for leaning in. This is why I'm grateful for this time, and I've really appreciated the opportunity to listen and to learn from you. And I'm looking forward to continuing to find a good way forward together. I want to say I know we've got a long way to go, but I'm really grateful that we're working towards creating a campus community that is free of gender-based violence and rooted in mutual care, respect, and dare I say, love. So before I go, I want to just reiterate that I know today's discussions were really real and heartfelt. We've covered some tough topics, and I want to say to people, please do not hesitate to seek out SFU campus and community supports that are being posted in the chat. So to everyone involved in addressing gender-based violence and working with survivors and victims, both within and outside of SFU, I raise my hands to you. This is important work. And I truly believe that the honest and difficult conversations are going to help us heal. And we've had a difficult but healing conversation today, and for that I'm grateful. So thanks everyone for being here. Please take care, stay well, and I will pass it back to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Joy, for that thoughtful reflection. I really appreciate your time to be spent with us today. So I'm going to do a little bit of a close. We have 3 minutes left. And I know that Michael would like to say something as well. So I'll just do a closing and then I'm going to pass it to Michael, and then we'll go from there. So just thank you to Kevin and Michael and Sage and Jake for sharing your time and your hearts with us again in this virtual event. And a big thank you for everyone who helped put the event together. And we have a really amazing planning committee, and I'm so grateful for everyone. I want to remind you also that you can register for Moose Hide Campaign Day, which is on May 12th. So we're adding the link to register in the chat. Next Gen Men is also hosting a circle on Indigenous masculinities in collaboration with the Moose Hide Campaign on March 24th that I highly encourage you to join. It should be a really interesting conversation. And the event information is also just posted in the chat. And lastly, I just want to leave the audience with one last question to reflect on. And it's, what actions are you going to take to stand up against gender-based violence in your community? And I just, my hands up to all of you, and also just going to make note that the support room Zoom is posted in the chat as well, and the supports. So I'm going to make a close, and I'm going to let Michael say some final words for us. So thank you, everyone.
Go ahead.
I want to take the time. Highest respects to my family, Sage, Jake, Joy. That was a part of history, I feel like, that we got to witness, about having this huge conversation. Our teachers always shared, as I heard from what Jake and Sage shared with me, one point she shares with me all the time: hurt people often hurt people. We don't mean to hurt people. But I feel like the best thing that Jake and Sage can do, because we've been doing it for a long time, is to go into the schools and educate the students. Because you don't know how much that impacts the youth. You might see that, Jake, you might see that as those cool kids, but they go later on home and they talk amongst each other. I see that through my brothers. We go to schools and we share our stories, because there's better ways of healing as we share. That hide, I remember back in 2015, I was all the way out in Toronto and someone was telling me about your Moose Hide campaign. Sage, what your family has done. That's through word of mouth. That's what you've done. Your family has done. That's just because you saw something that was wrong and you wanted to correct it in history. That's what you've done. And we need to recognize that and honor that. I want to say thank you for that. Thank your sister. Thank your dad for doing that. That's what I have in my heart, because he brought up this conversation. For all 56 of us that are still here, I ask all the people that are here to be a witness to what's going on today. If you're in our traditional ways, as Sage knows, There were no cameras like how we have right now. There were no video cameras. We never written anything down. Everything was oral that we passed down, as what you hear today. Still, we practice those ways. And I ask everyone to be a witness. You are the witness. You are that camera. You are that book, you know, that you write things down. And I want you to share this with at least 5 people, what you witnessed today. And if you shared this with 5 people, times that by 56, there's 200 to 300 people that know more. And you ask those people to share that with 5 people. And that's 1,000. Just like that, a simple gesture like that can make such a big difference. Being open, being vulnerable in a school setting, sharing what you just shared, Jake, can change lives. Because I just shared about my personal experience about going to high school, feeling like I'm not man enough. I shouldn't show emotions. I've only seen my dad cry like 5 times in my life. I cry all the time. And once I shared that with these youth, they finally felt safe enough to reach out for counseling. And that's something that you need to share. That's something that you need to share, Sage. You empowered Indigenous women and Indigenous men to do better without you even being there. That's how strong that is. Every time I see someone with moose on their shirt, I know they represent something that's for the better. See, remember that. And there's one word that can really change everything, and that's a word that my mother shares with me all the time. It's not Samat. We are one. We are one. And that's what we need to get out of the way, is race, religion, and everything out of the way. And look at, we are all one. And we can make this place better. We can. It's not just Indigenous people. It's not just one person to point fingers at. The things that my grandma shares with me, she says, when you point your fingers, what do you see? She said, you see one person pointing, you point a finger at that one person, but there's also 3 fingers pointing back at you. You can be a better solution. Every child, just like how you said, is born with a gift and a purpose. That's what our old people shared. All of us can make a difference. Those children are taught to be racist. Those children are taught to act the way that they're acting. But we can go back to those schools and teach those teachers the importance of how to be gentle with them. How to be gentle with what you do. And SFU is a university that's taken that first step forward and actually having Indigenous people sit at the table and making those changes. I'm not just saying that, Sage. We've been sitting with Steve Dooley for many years, and we were drumming when Joy just got announced to be president. We were there to honor her in the waves. So these people really want change. I have to really sit back and acknowledge that this is such an important need, and I thank SFU for that. And I thank Sage and I thank Jake for all the work that you do. I know some of the conversation that we have is very heavy, and a part of our protocol is that we start with a song, we start with a prayer, and we end with a prayer. Because we want to educate you and we want you to carry the knowledge that was shared today, but we don't want you to carry the hurt that we carry. We want to make sure when we share this prayer, because this is the way that of our teachings is, if you're not home, that you make it home safe to your loved one. You make it home safe to your dad. You make it home safe to your daughter and your son, your husband, your dog if you just have a dog. There's someone that's always waiting for you to make sure that you make it home safe. But I just want to thank you for sharing a part of yourself and the good work that you guys are doing to make this place a better place, and recognize that and also celebrating that. So thank you. I'll take this home to my Siam Stakwasan, my leader in my community, and I'll share it with the neighboring nations. You continue to do your good work, and thank you for allowing us to be here to enjoy and witness such a great meeting. Thanks, Siam.
I just wanted to say before we do this song, my wife, Stakwasan, that's her traditional name, Chief Kelly-Gabriel. I know she'd want me to say this to you. She always says to me, you know what, we're the elders, elders are getting younger and younger all the time. We don't have many elders up in the community. We are the elders now. My wife always says, as a leader, you have to share what you know to the younger ones. pass that torch down. And what I'll say to you, Sage, as a carrier woman that's from Birds Lake, to Jake, where did it come from? Czechoslovakia. When I look at both of you, watch you speak, Nicole, younger generation, my wife would say, I know we're in good hands. I hold our hands up to each and every one of you for doing what you're doing and what you believe in. I truly believe what my son said, going into schools makes a difference. Years ago, way before reconciliation started, we were asked to go to elementary school. We were in a language where we live. The teachers said these children are really prejudiced and racist against First Nations people. I looked at that teacher and I said, you know what? We're going to educate those children and get them to go home and educate their parents and grandparents. Because who did they learn this from? We have to break the cycle. You know what? Our children are smart today. We talk about young born, niece or nephew coming. They tell us when we lose an elder, a new one comes. And I truly believe in that. They have the gifts that they're going to carry on day by day and change everybody. They told us years ago in our community, some of our healers, the way we have to go back to is our own ways thousands of years ago, because our ways don't work. And this is what we're doing in the community in Kwantlen and a lot of First Nations throughout. We're going back to our own traditional medicines, our languages are coming back. We're teaching the children. My son comes all the time, Nicole says, we do a lot of work together. Well, I taught him when he was little, Nicole. He works with his mom in the government office, so that's youth. My wife always says, we don't do it for us. If you are, there's the door. She does it for the next 7 generations. This is why we do the work we do, like what you're doing today. I just wanted to praise you both up for what you're doing. And I know it's going to be a good success. And I thank you, Joy, and I thank Steve. You are role models for the universities to get involved. You're only going to make that circle bigger. When people watch us, they're going to want to be part of it. And I thank you for respecting all the people that are here. You know what? You are family, Joy, my brother Steve is. And I thank you for your presence. And I wish you all nothing but the best, good health, most of all. So with that, we'll do close this up.
The song that we're gonna share with you, it's a song that comes from a man named Frank Leon up in Stehelis. He made a song called the Unity Song because he believed that when you hear our people speak, you'll hear them say all the relations all the time. And the reason why our people say our relations is because we're laid up and down the river, no matter what. We're all family. We practiced ceremony today. We shared our truths. This is a circle. Imagine a big circle. Nobody's different and nobody's better than anyone else. And when we come together as that word, Natsamat, we are one. Latsa Shwali, one spirit. Great things like this can happen if you allow our people to have a chance. Look at Spark, she might be sparking a new generation of free thinkers. Strong women, right? And I want to honor this song because we're family after we break bread. You know, we've been family with SFU for a long time, and we don't just say that just because we say it. We mean it when we mean it. So we broke bread today, and after today, everyone that's here, all 52 people and the ones that were here before, are part of our family. And I thank you for being a witness today. You make sure you travel safe. And if you're going through any sort of injuries, as I know some of my family is in this chat, I hope you have a speedy recovery. These prayers are meant to uplift you, to continue to do that good work, to make sure that glass of water that you have is still full. Because when you keep giving, as you do, Sage and Jake, that glass goes down. And we want to uplift you for the good works that you continue to do that good work. So thank you for the wonderful day, SFU. Joy, Jake, and Sage. I'm going to honor you with this word, with this song. And if you see the hands go up, the chief said, when there's no higher way of saying thanks in your English, French, or even our traditional language, we share an honor song. So we're gonna honor you with a song called the Unity Song. To make sure your journeys keep going forward. And the ancestors are guiding you each step of the way, if you believe. Have a good day, everybody.
Have a good day, you guys. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Kevin and
Safe travels
Michael.
if you have any- if you're not at
And
home.
thank you, Michael. All right, that concludes our session today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and for staying. It's extra 15 minutes. So have a great rest of your day and sending you all love. Take care.
Bye. Thank you for having us. Masicho.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great job, Nicole, and everyone supporting.
Thank you.
Great job, everyone. Oh, we're on.
Thank you.
No, we're on.
Oh, great job, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Have a good day,
Thank
guys.
you.